There comes a moment in almost every person's life when something feels wrong. Not dramatic enough to call it a crisis, not painful enough to call it suffering, just a quiet feeling that refuses to leave. You wake up, go to work, reply to messages, laugh at the right moments, chase the next goal. And from the outside, your life looks exactly as it should. But inside, a question begins to whisper. Is this really my life? Most people silence that voice before it grows louder. They convince themselves they're simply tired, unmotivated, or going through a phase. They tell themselves that happiness will arrive after the promotion, after they earn more money, after they find the right relationship, after they finally have enough. Yet strangely, even people who achieve everything they once dreamed of often hear the same whisper. Because the problem was never what they had. It was who they had become. Carl Jung believed that the greatest tragedy isn't failure. It's spending your entire life becoming someone the world applauds, while slowly abandoning the person you were meant to be. The frightening part is that this doesn't happen all at once. It happens one small compromise at a time. And by the time most people notice it, they've forgotten who they were before the world told them who to become. From the day we're born, we begin collecting masks. As children, we learn that certain behaviors earn praise while others invite rejection. We discover that being quiet makes one adult happy, while being confident impresses another. At school, we're rewarded for fitting in. At work, we're expected to play a role. On social media, we learn to curate versions of ourselves that are easier to admire than to understand. At school, we're rewarded for fitting in. At work, we're expected to play a role. On social media, we learn to curate versions of ourselves that are easier to admire than to understand. At school, we're rewarded for fitting in. At work, we're expected to play a role. On social media, we learn to curate versions of ourselves that are easier to admire than to understand. Without realizing it, we spend years constructing an identity designed not around authenticity, but acceptance. Jung called this mask the persona. The persona isn't evil. In fact, it's necessary. Society couldn't function if every thought and emotion were expressed without restraint. The persona allows us to cooperate, build careers, form relationships, and earn trust. It's the face we present to the world. The danger begins when we forget it's only a mask. Imagine an actor who spends decades playing the same character. Day after day, year after year, the lines become automatic. Eventually, the actor no longer remembers where the performance ends and the real person begins. This is what happens to many of us. We become the successful professional, the perfect student, the dependable parent, the funny friend, the ambitious entrepreneur, the strong one who never asks for help. These identities may bring admiration, but they often come at a hidden cost. Every role we embrace leaves another part of ourselves waiting in the shadows. The artist who chose security, the explorer who settled for routine, the dreamer who learned to be practical, the sensitive soul who convinced themselves emotions were weakness. Those forgotten parts don't disappear. They wait. And the longer they're ignored, the louder they demand to be seen. This is why achievement doesn't always produce fulfillment. People often imagine success as a finish line. They believe that once they accumulate enough wealth, status, recognition, or influence, peace will naturally follow. But Jung noticed something different in the people who came to him seeking help. Many had already achieved everything society told them to pursue. Yet they felt strangely empty, not because they lacked success, because success had answered the wrong question. The world asks, "What have you accomplished?" Your soul asks, "Who have you become?" Those are not the same question. Modern psychology echoes this insight. Researchers studying extrinsic motivation have consistently found that goals centered on money, prestige, and external validation produce only temporary satisfaction. Once achieved, the mind quickly adapts and begins chasing something else. It's called the hedonic treadmill. You run faster, you achieve more. Yet emotionally, you remain in the same place. Not because ambition is wrong, but because external success cannot replace internal meaning. This explains why some of the wealthiest people feel profoundly lost, while others with far less seem deeply at peace. The difference often isn't what they possess. It's whether they're living a life that feels genuinely their own. Jung believed every person carries an unlived life, the version of themselves they never gave permission to exist. Sometimes it appears as regret, sometimes as restlessness, sometimes as the strange feeling that you're succeeding in a life you never consciously chose, and perhaps you felt it too. Not as overwhelming sadness, but as a quiet realization that you've become incredibly skilled at meeting everyone else's expectations, while slowly forgetting your own. That realization is uncomfortable, but it may also be the beginning of something extraordinary, because the moment you recognize the mask, you also discover that it can be removed. But here's where Jung's philosophy becomes radically different from the self-help advice we hear today. Most people believe they need to find themselves. Jung believed you don't find yourself. You uncover the parts you've spent your entire life hiding. Imagine standing in a room filled with mirrors. Every mirror reflects a different version of you. The employee, the friend, the partner, the child your parents wanted, the person your followers expect. You've spent so many years polishing these reflections that you've forgotten to ask a simple question. Which one is actually me? The answer doesn't come from looking outward. It comes from turning inward. And that is a terrifying journey. Because silence has a way of revealing truths that noise keeps hidden. This is why so many people stay constantly distracted. Scrolling, working, watching, buying, consuming. Not because these things are inherently bad, but because they protect us from the one conversation we fear most, the conversation with ourselves. When the noise finally disappears, uncomfortable questions begin to emerge. Why did I choose this career? Do I genuinely want this life? Or was I taught to want it? If nobody judged me, what would I become? These aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that your authentic self is trying to speak. Jung called the lifelong process of answering these questions individuation, the gradual integration of every hidden, rejected, and forgotten part of yourself into a complete human being. It isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone whole. And wholeness is very different from perfection. Perfection depends on approval. Wholeness depends on honesty. It asks you to admit that you are both confident and insecure, strong and vulnerable, ambitious and deeply afraid, kind, yet capable of anger. Instead of hiding these contradictions, Jung believed maturity begins when we accept them. Because the parts we reject don't disappear. They simply begin controlling us from the shadows. An ignored fear becomes anxiety. Suppressed sadness becomes emotional numbness. Unexpressed creativity becomes quiet resentment. An unlived dream becomes lifelong regret. The irony is that the more we hide from ourselves, the more exhausted we become pretending to be someone else. Perhaps this is why so many people today feel emotionally drained despite living in the most connected, technologically advanced era in history. We have endless entertainment but very little reflection. Endless information but very little wisdom. We know what's happening everywhere in the world, except within ourselves. Ancient Stoic philosophers understood this long before modern psychology. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good." Not because the answers are easy, but because they cannot be found anywhere else. Your purpose isn't hidden inside another promotion, another relationship, another purchase, another achievement. Those things may enrich your life, but they cannot define it. Meaning begins the moment your outer life starts reflecting your inner truth. That doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities or disappearing into the mountains. It means asking yourself difficult questions with complete honesty. What excites me when nobody is watching? What fear has been making my decisions? What part of myself have I abandoned just to fit in? These questions rarely produce immediate answers. But they begin something far more valuable. They begin a relationship with yourself. And perhaps that is what Jung wanted us to understand all along. The greatest danger isn't dying before your time. The greatest danger is reaching the end of your life only to realize you faithfully lived someone else's definition of success. A life filled with achievements, but empty of authenticity. Because in the end, people rarely regret not working one more weekend. They regret the conversations they never had, the passions they buried, the risks they never took, the version of themselves they kept postponing until someday, and someday quietly became never. Maybe that's why the voice inside you has never completely disappeared. Maybe it isn't criticizing you. Maybe it has been patiently waiting for the day you stop chasing the life you were told to want, and finally begin creating the one that feels unmistakably yours. If this documentary resonated with you, don't let it become just another video you watched and forgot. Take one quiet moment today and ask yourself a single question. Am I building a life that looks successful, or a life that feels true? Sometimes one honest question can change the direction of an entire lifetime. If you're ready to explore more timeless ideas from psychology, philosophy, Stoicism, and human behavior, subscribe to The Inner Compass. Every week, we dive beneath the surface of the human mind to uncover the truths that help us live with greater clarity, purpose, and self-awareness.